Do do do, theme song. Do do do, I'm broke so this is my theme song. Do do do, just imagine this is an awesome theme song. Do do, theme song. Left of the box. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy, and joining me today is a very special, brave, I'll give him that, brave guest, the first of the NDP leadership candidates to grace my channel. Well, the first official one. Welcome, Tony. Please introduce yourself to my audience.
Sure. Hi, Sandy. Well, I'm a parent and a grandparent. I'm a farmer. I've been a social and environmental and political activist basically all my life. I've been farming for over 50 years. Started out as a hired hand on dairy farms and then bought our own farm in 1973. It's a small 100-acre ecological organic farm in northern Huron County in Ontario. I first ran for the NDP in 1980 because as a young farmer, I'd watched the Liberals and Conservatives trade speeches in defense of high interest rates when they traded places in the House, and high interest rates were devastating for homeowners, for small businessmen, for farmers. And I used to say they always talked about you had to tighten your belt. Well, some people tightened their belt because they were getting thinner. Rich people with high interest rates were tightening their belts because they were getting fatter. And some people were tightening their belts around their necks because they were in despair when they were being foreclosed on and their livelihood being destroyed by the high interest rates. Mm-hmm. So the New Democrats, Ed Broadbent and the New Democrats were the people who were talking and made sense to me. And so I was persuaded to be a candidate in 1980 and in some ways haven't looked back. I'm running because as a parent and a grandparent, I am very concerned about the world that we're choosing to create for my children and grandchildren. 45 years ago, we had time to make a transition to a more ecologically regenerative and sustainable society. The Science Council had come out with a study called Canada as a Conserver Society as opposed to a consumer society. And, I was an environmental studies graduate, and we knew at that time you couldn't keep expanding material and energy use on a finite planet. And yet we still, it just drove me crazy to hear the G7 stuff and Carney coming back saying, well, we're going for stability and growth. Well, you're stabilizing a system that keeps the elites in power and increases wealth inequity and insecurity for most people. And you're growing in a cancerous way on the planet. So it just to me, it's insane. And so I decided to reach out to my relatively, small personal contact list when I got thinking about, I'd like to hear somebody talking about the things I think are important. And I'm not hearing anybody doing that in any of the, liberal or conservative leadership aren't doing any on that. And I wasn't necessarily picking it up from the NDP in the way I would have liked to hear it. So I reached out to people and said, what do you think? And I did a little interview with CTV, and it got a lot of likes. And my friends and acquaintances came back and said, yeah, that gives us hope. We want to hear that. And so I decided to start going through the process of jumping over the hurdles that the party has to get as a leadership candidate. And it's interesting to me, if they'd only put the rate of inflation on the entry fee that they had when Jagmeet Singh became the leader, we'd be looking at a $38,000 entry fee. Instead, it's $133,000. So it's a 330% increase. So it's a big hurdle, and that's one that I'll talk about later. But when I ran in 2019, I ran on the basis of representation, regeneration, and redistribution. I've added a fourth R for this campaign, which is redesign. But maybe that's enough of an introduction. You said you have some questions, and I can come back to those.
No, this is great because I watched a few of your videos to get an idea as to who you are before I decided to sit down, so I could get an idea as to, the gotcha questions, but I'm not really that type of person. And I'm actually super fascinated by a lot of what you do because I do cover environmental issues on my channel from time to time, and especially with, the increase in natural disasters. And a phrase that I tend to use in these situations is those with the least suffer the most, because it's the people with poverty, people with disabilities that when these natural disasters hit are harmed the most. Because if you can't run from a forest fire or a flash flood, you don't tend to make it. A lot of people who live unhoused during the heat domes, during massive freezes, it's staggering, and it's never given enough attention. So I'm really, I am happy to see somebody giving it a good amount of attention in this because, I like have all these questions, like not just about the NDP leadership race. Like I'm actually very curious, and in a different circumstance, I would love to just have you on my channel to talk about all this environmental stuff too. Because it's like, okay, I think back in the 80s, there was the issue with the ozone layer, but we were able to rally back then and do something about it. But then it's like in the 90s, something happened where all of these visions of making a better, cleaner world went out the window, and trying to figure out what that is.
Well, I think if your listeners and watchers Google Charlie Angus's channel and go to, he had a podcast called The 80s Could Have Saved Us, where he talks about the fossil fuel companies knowing that they were creating, in fact, a geological impact in terms of the amount of carbon that was being released. And instead of saying, oh, picking up on what Jimmy Carter and others were saying is, we've got to reduce our dependency and our use of these things. And this was after the Arab oil embargo as well. And, we had an opportunity then to shift direction. And the oil companies doubled down on sales and development and fighting and misinforming the public about the risks and the problems. And so, 50 years later, here we are suffering the consequences. In my lifetime, the carbon in the atmosphere has increased by 35% in my 73 years. That's a shift of geological proportions. That kind of change in the environment shouldn't happen in a lifetime.
Well,
It should happen over tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, or unless like a super volcano goes off, then you would expect to see spikes like that.
Multiple super volcanoes.
Yeah.
So we have created. We are in the process of creating an uninhabitable Earth for human beings, and the problem with that is, when I was in university, I came across a very interesting little pamphlet, and it was called Conquest of the Land Through 7,000 Years. And this soil scientist, USDA, United States Department of Agricultural soil scientist, went to the cradles of civilization, and he found deserts and eroded landscapes and, big buildings that no longer were at all in a livable landscape, because those societies had destroyed the environment which had raised them, from which they'd come. Well, now with modern capitalist, consumerist, corporate society, and that ideology, it's conquest of the planet. And so there's no place else to go. And I don't think Mars is going to be a hospitable place. We've got this miraculous planet with this thin layer of atmosphere and this thinner layer of biological life, plants and animals on the surface. And, whether you call it creation, the environment, Mother Earth, it's our home. And that's why I'm talking about regeneration and redesign as part of my 4Rs, is because we've got to stop harming the ecosystem, and we've got to start healing the damage we've done. And that's the regenerative part. And the redesign part is for our communities to think about, well, okay, how can we have the things that are the quality of life we want as a society by using a lot less stuff and a lot less energy? And I think the thing that excites me as an activist and an environmentalist is that there are a lot of things going on at the community level. And there are a lot of groups, nature groups, bird watching groups, there people fighting corporate efforts to use their area as a landfill site or a dump or a industrial development area when they value the environment that they've got. Federal government could be supporting healthcare and education as nation building projects, and then supporting local communities that are working to develop better ways of dealing with our needs as a society that don't use as much energy and resources. And my experience is that being frugal and working with nature is very satisfying and very rewarding. It's not like we're saying go back to the Stone Age. And I mean, the Stone Age may not have been that bad. None of us were there. It appears that people did take care of each other during that time and had community. But we have to figure out how to do the things that we want and need using much, much less energy and resources, or we're going to commit ecocide, kill the planet, which is also for human beings suicide. We're on a track that is not going to have a happy ending if we don't figure out how to do it differently. And unfortunately, the people who are in charge at the moment seem to think that we can keep growing. And I mean, it's the psychology and psychotic behavior of economists who, economists, you can make money out of nothing. You write numbers and you loan people money and you think you can keep it growing. But the real world doesn't work that way. And we are disrupting the water cycle, the mineral cycle. Certainly we're just decimating the biological community. And for many of us, it's hard to see that because it's hard to have a marker that says, okay, it was like this 50 years ago, or it was like this 30 years ago. And now it's gotten less life. But if people think about driving somewhere 30 years ago and how many bugs were spattered on the windshield, compare it to today. But I have a really powerful marker, which is that 50 years ago, my wife and I were married in our orchard, and it was just insects all over the place. It was just alive. And this year on our 50th anniversary, I went out into the orchard. It was full bloom again, sunny day, and it was silent. And I could see one insect here, one insect there, one insect there. And insects are a very critical part of the food web and the web of life on the planet. And if you like bird watching, or you like birds, if you like fishing or like fish, we need insects to feed all those things. So we need to support local communities that are looking at how they start regenerating their local environments.
Okay. Well, should probably get back to the actual leadership race questions. So you already answered why you decided to run this time. And you have admitted in another interview that you do see yourself as the underdog. That it's a long shot, but Mandami, he started off with 1%.
Yeah. Well, what I used to tell, I coached my daughter's co-ed soccer team when they were kids, and people, oh yeah, we're going to win. I said, it's how many balls we put in the net, guys, and how we work together as a team that's going to determine how well we do. And my view is if the concerns that I'm raising resonate with enough people, I could become the leader. I mean, right now there are 5 people in the race. If we say my chances aren't great, 80% of us are not going to be the leader. One person's going to be the leader. So I think it's important to be honest with people. Mm-hmm. And but we are starting from a very small grassroots level. I didn't have a big internet following when I started this process, and there are very serious hurdles. Right now, we're looking at a November 13th deadline for the first quarterly payment of $100,000 or $25,000, a quarter of the $100,000, but it's really $33,000 that we have to raise because the party has a 25% administration fee that they're putting on any donations. So
what do they think this is? Ticketmaster?
Well, it sometimes it makes you wonder. So yeah, if people, if what I'm saying resonates with people and they'd like to hear it continue in the leadership race, then unfortunately, I have to say we need your donations. Mm-hmm. Now they qualify for the political tax credit if you're paying income tax, which is another way that the tax system favors those who have money against those who don't. But that's our reality. The other thing we're needing to do is get 500 nomination signatures from across the country. Mm-hmm. And you have to be a New Democrat to do that. You don't have to be a New Democrat to donate. And you can donate on our website, which is tonymcquailgreenprogressive.ca. But my hope is to build a green progressive movement. And, politically, ordinary people didn't get the vote until after the First World War. Up until the First World War, only rich men could vote. After the First World War, women got the vote and working people got the vote. But getting the vote with a first past the post system meant that for the most part, we never got power. The United Farmers never got very far. The independent labor movements didn't get very far. The Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, some minority governments were able to leverage things a little bit, but they never got seats in parliament in proportion to how people voted for them. And that's been true for the NDP and the Green Party. And part of the problem with that is when people start to feel that you don't have much of a chance, is then they start voting strategically. And, for democracy to work well, and I think at its best, democracy lets us find our collective wisdom. And it also lets society, as societal values change, move gradually without having to have a revolution or a collapse. But if not everybody's at the table in proportion to how the public supports them, then you don't really have a functioning democracy. And so what I've been saying is, as long as we've got the first past the post system, let's figure out how to create green progressive coalitions so that we aren't running competing candidates, so that we have a clear platform that we put out well before an election that we've agreed to work on together. And then, give people a real alternative option. And that's talking about a fair tax system, talking about a just transition to a greener and more progressive and equitable economy. So, that's the first step. That's why representation is my first R. We've already talked about the second R, regeneration. The third one is redistribution. And one of the real challenges for people is to understand just how obscenely skewed our economy has gotten. Because, when you write a million or a billion, it's the difference between an M and a B. And when you do it longhand, it's 3 zeros. But if I tell you, Sandy, that you've got 1 million seconds to live, that would give you 11 more days. But if I told you you had 1 billion seconds to live, it would be 31 years, which gives you a little better sense of the difference between 1 million and 1 billion. And so, nobody needs $1 billion. What that tells me is that we've got a tax system that's failing in terms of looking at how we allocate. Because the other things that people often don't realize, it's not just because people got a lot of money because of the way our economists think economies should be structured and then tell us that's how the tax system should be organized. But it's also because people with more money use more of the resources that we pay for with our tax dollars. Billionaires get a lot more benefit out of ports and airports and road systems. And they also get a lot more use out of the legal system, the courts and the police. And they also get a big benefit from our healthcare system and our education system in terms of relatively healthy workers and educated workers. So the wealthy get an awful lot of benefit. And if they're using offshore tax havens and loopholes in our tax laws, and we don't have a progressive wealth tax at this point, they're not paying their fair share. And that has the additional disadvantage to the rest of society that people then feel the tax system isn't fair and they're angry about taxes instead of recognizing this is how we collectively do together what we can't do by ourselves. And on my cake chart back there, Hazel Henderson is one of my favorite economists, and she said, I'm tired of pie charts. And she said, I want a cake chart. And her cake chart was a layer cake. And she said, bottom layer there is nature. The next layer is the community and the family, the unwaged part of our society that never shows up in GDP, but it's absolutely essential. And then there's the public sector that produces the infrastructure and community supports like education and healthcare and the legal system. And then on the top is the private sector. And she said, the really important thing to understand about a layer cake is every layer depends on all the layers below it. And to me, that's a paradigm shifter, because if you listen to our news today, you'd think that the economy was the most important thing and society was supposed to serve the economy and the environment was something way off there. But that isn't how it works in the real world. The other economist I like is also a woman, and that's Kate Raworth, who wrote Donut Economics. And it's interesting, both of them use some sort of baked good for their thing, but hers was the donut. And the donut has all the sort of, on the outer layer is the ecological limits we shouldn't go beyond. And on the inner layer are the social boundaries that we shouldn't fall below. And again, it's a good image to capture a whole lot of ideas on one page. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we're failing on both of those at this point. Mm-hmm. And so the redistribution is something we need to take seriously, and it's the way we could start to create a more equitable society and also fund the transition to a more regenerative ecological economy. And if we don't do it, it's not just, as you said, the people who are most vulnerable are the ones most damaged by environmental issues and problems, whether it's, the smoke is going to affect somebody with asthma a lot more than somebody without. And I mean, that's the way forest fires were affecting us a couple of years ago in Ontario. Mm-hmm. But the elite, there is no other planet like planet Earth that people are going to be able to migrate to if they've got a zillion dollars. Mm-hmm. Money isn't going to buy us out of this problem, but action that says we've got to change how we're doing. We've got to redesign how we structure our lives to meet our basic needs. And that's the thing. We, as a Quaker, we have an old saying, live simply so that others may simply live. And my experience of living relatively simply is that it's not a sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It frees you up in other ways, but that's another story.
Yeah. Well, one thing I always try to impress on my audience is that I'm a fan of, I would just be like, no, we just take away 90% of the billionaires' wealth because their quality of life wouldn't change a bit. Everything they have, they would still have. Like nothing in their life would change. And meanwhile, somebody like me who relies on ODSP, if I got $2,500 a month, that's life-changing, life-saving.
Well, that's where a guaranteed annual income and a living wage structure, and what when the studies are done, when they aren't canceled by conservative governments who don't want the information, what we find is that when people have a bit of security, they invest in themselves. They invest locally. They create a much happier and healthier society right where they are. And they spend, that money gets spent locally. It doesn't hive off to speculative investments elsewhere. So it's a real way to strengthen Canada. That would be, a nation building project. Mm-hmm. And the rich tell us that, if you give people money, they'll just sit on their butts and not do anything. It's not at all true. It's not the case that, people stayed home and looked after their kids. People got more education. People do a variety of things. People feel secure enough that they aren't living hand to mouth, that they can actually plan ahead and think about what can they do to improve their lives and their situation. That's where you invest, not in like I looked at Carney's nation building projects. They're going to make a few big corporations rich, and they aren't going to solve the climate issues at all, and they aren't going to spread out value across the country. They're going to benefit a few big corporations. If you're doing a rebuild or an upgrade of a port, you're building a liquefied natural gas terminal. These are not things that spread across the country and community and strengthen us as a country. They're projects that are going to spend a bunch of money and going to benefit a relatively few. And yeah, there'll be some good jobs out of it, but good jobs have been used to justify all sorts of destruction. I mean, that's what the Ford government's doing right now, advertising for the Ring of Fire. We need to figure out how to create a lot more localized jobs, and that's where an energy transition to, more efficiency, insulating houses, making them more ecological across the country would create a lot more jobs and a lot more localized employment across our society. So, we need to change. We need to redesign how we do things so that we're making long-term investments in a healthy future for the people and the country.
Yeah, so we're recording this the evening of November 3rd. Yep. That's the Monday. So tomorrow the budget is coming out from the federal government. Are you worried about that?
I'm extremely worried. The indications have been, we're going to spend more on the military, we're going to spend mega projects, and we're going to talk about austerity for the programs that ordinary people depend on across this country. We'll see what actually comes out. But, yeah, I'm quite concerned. And I don't know whether the budget will pass. If it doesn't, it could be a real opportunity for people to say, gosh, really tired of liberals telling us that they're going to do good things for us before an election and then come back and slap us with austerity. And they also might say, well, the conservatives have had an opportunity to make life better for us when they've been in power. And they're taking an approach which is very much like Mr. Trump south of the border in terms of pit bull politics. So one of the things I've been saying is I think as a green progressives, we need to reach out not just to current and past New Democrats, but we need to reach out to the 50% of people who've given up on the political system and stopped voting. And I think we also need to reach out to disillusioned liberals and concerned conservatives who think that, well, you build a community more by figuring out how you can work together and maybe look at ways to build rather than tear down each other. I would think there's some liberals out in Alberta who thought Mr. Trudeau's idea of the last first past the post election in 2015 might actually mean that their votes would count. So I would think there'd be some disillusioned liberals around the world, not only on that particular disingenuous lie, but in terms of the liberal position on the environment, because as I say, when I first ran, we had 45 years to make a more gradual and gentle transition. We're now in the stage of flooding and fires and dislocations across the planet, and we need to get serious. We need to put this on the kind of footing that victory gardens were in England during the Second World War. We've got to figure out how to change things. And what I would say to people is don't count on our current governments to start heading in the right direction, because they haven't done it in the last 45 years. They're still talking about growth. So what you need to be thinking about is, where can I put my little garden to have some food that's right next door, the 1 yard diet, your yard, because we are heading into times that local communities are going to have to figure out how to deal with the issues that are critical to human survival. security of food supply, figuring out local transportation. I was in Calgary for a conference on food leadership conference, and I'd been doing a Gaza vigil at home, so I made a little sign that I could take and unfold and do in Calgary. And watching cars go by on this busy street corner, I would say only one car had two people in it for every 20 that had a single person. Well, if you worked together and created a municipal Uber system or a ride share program, and you took half the people and shared rides, that could cut down your congestion, your air pollution in downtown Calgary, your cost of commuting, and create also the opportunity to possibly socialize with somebody else as you were driving to and from work or wherever you were going. So, it's that kind of thing that you don't have to create a whole new fleet of cars to do that. You can use our existing stuff, reduce the wear and tear on the roads, reduce the wear and tear on the cars. We are not making effective use of the resources we have now to reduce our energy and material consumption.
Okay, so before I get into some of the questions as to what you would do as leader of the NDP, could you just let our audience know a little bit more about the process of becoming a candidate? Like if I wanted to become a candidate, well, I already kind of have an idea because I've tried to run for the NDP. So I know a little bit about the vetting issues and stuff. But let's say somebody's like, I want to put my fun hat into the ring as well.
If Tony can do it, why shouldn't I?
Yeah.
Well, you should. There's about a 30-page application you have to fill out to be vetted by the party. It required a $1,500 fee when you submitted your application for them to vet it. And it took HST, so it was about almost $1,700. Then you have to submit a paper that you've got a person who's willing to be your chief financial officer and look after money. And so you have a variety of forms that you have to fill out. You would apply to the federal NDP to get an application package. And then after you do that, you have to get 500 nomination signatures from NDP members. And you need 50 from Atlantic Canada, 50 from Quebec, 50 from Ontario, 50 from the Prairies, and 50 from BC. You need an equitable split between women and men. And you need 10% need to be from youth, people who are under 26, members of the party. And you have to have 100 people who identify in some way, either racially discriminated disabilities, a variety of things, LGBTQ. So they're looking for nominations that cover a wide range of populace. And, that makes sense if you're going to be saying you're representing a diverse community, but it also means that you need to be able to reach out across the country. There, people can sign electronically, sign the nomination papers electronically, and they can also donate online as well. But then the big hurdle is the financial one. And as I said, basically you have to turn $133,000 over to the party to enter the race. And it's in 4 installments, but 2 of them come fairly close together in November. So that's the one we're struggling with now.
Yeah, I feel economic pressure and stress all the time. I can't imagine what that would be like. Okay. And when is like the actual voting night? I guess you could say, yeah, the vote for the leader.
It'll be at the end of March, and I believe there's a 2-week period when people can vote online prior to the actual convention at the end of March.
So what happens if Mark Carney has his budget out tomorrow and it is just pure crap and the other parties are like, no, we can't put our name to this, and he calls an election?
The Conservatives were working with him until Pierre Poilievre got back into power, and he basically said to the NDP, I'm conservative enough in these bills I'm passing, Bill 5 and Bill C5, that I don't need you guys at all. But with Polyev back in the House and thinking that the conservatives could win if they had another election, the conservatives, despite it being the kind of budget they would have possibly brought in, may well not support it. And I don't know how the NDP caucus is going to handle it. I'm not in the caucus.
Yeah,
but
because
if the government falls, we could be into an election, by Christmas or before Christmas.
So how would that work with the party not having like an actual, it's just the interim leader?
It would be a challenge. And my hope would be that it would run on a very strong green progressive platform, that we would be calling for a citizens' assembly on proportional representation is the first thing we do and require when we got back into the House. I would also, what I was calling for was a citizens' assembly on the principles of a fair tax system, and that we would close tax loopholes in terms of offshore banking systems, the tax havens offshore, and also bring in a progressive wealth tax and make a commitment to work toward the kinds of things outlined in the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives alternative budget, which they've put out, which talks about how we could really build Canadian sovereignty by investing at the community and grassroots and local levels across the country in a variety of things. It's well worth a look at. I think if your viewers Google Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives alternative budget, they should be able to find it, or they can contact our campaign. Those run a really strong alternative to the Carney Polyev, help the rich, austerity for the working folks, austerity for our communities, keep cutting healthcare. I've never understood, Sandy, why people elect governments that don't believe in public services, people who believe in privatization and believe in corporate control, which are the liberals and conservatives. They've been the parties of the elite since Confederation. Why we keep electing them and then are surprised that they don't deliver and try and, in fact, starve the public services and then say, well, it's not working, so we better let the private sector do it. It's just bizarre to me.
A lot of the classic liberals right now, I think they were expecting Mark Carney to be something that he wasn't. Mark Carney is basically just, he's more conservative than a lot of the conservatives, and I think he really betrayed a lot of his voters that way.
Well, I mean, Justin Trudeau betrayed a lot of his voters in terms of pipelines and energy, in terms of first past the post. At some point, you got to wake up. And I mean, my wake up call was back in 1979, actually, because as a young farmer, I was concerned about the impact that high interest rates was having on the farm community, as well as, small businesses and homeowners. But my real experience was in the farm community. The liberals had been defending the high interest rate policies, and the conservatives have been telling us how terrible it was for the country. And then the conservatives got elected with Joe Clark in 79. And it was like they left their speeches on the desk. And the conservatives picked up the liberal speeches defending high interest, and the liberals picked up the conservative speeches pillaring it. And they went at each other again, but they kept the same damn policy in place. And, and Maclean's magazine came out with an article on where the parties got their money, and Bank of Montreal was giving 50 grand to the liberals and 50 grand to the conservatives. And the Royal was doing 50-50, and Nova Scotia, I think, was 25-25. New Democrats didn't accept money from the banks or big businesses. And so it's suddenly, this is how this system is working for these guys, for the banks and the 1%. And not working for the farmers or the homeowners or the small business people or the folks on the ground. So, the 99%, if they wake up, they could have a different government, but they have to make that choice. And we have to do a much better job of giving them a clear choice. And that's why green progressives have to work together. in my opinion.
Okay, well, I have limited time with you, and I'm loving this conversation. So I have a few questions that I do want to. We'll try to hammer through
Well,
them. Okay. So
sure.
you represent the country really well, like the farm areas and whatnot. So what would you say to, the person in Toronto that doesn't know the difference between a cow and a donkey?
We need each other.
Mhm.
We need each other. You need, the food production capacity. You need the environmental air cleaning capacity of the green plants that we manage out here in the countryside. And we need you to be our market. And we need a bunch of the goods and services that are produced in the urban area. We are a community. And we need to figure out how to work better together and how to create more interconnection between people. But we also need to slow down, because in our rushing, and I am definitely a country person. I'm not. I've lived in Toronto twice, once as a student and once when I was the executive assistant to the Ontario Minister of Agriculture. And I'm more at home out in the countryside. We need to figure out how to meet the needs of both communities. And I mean, when I went to the Canadian Labour Congress Forum in Ottawa, I was just shocked and appalled at the number of people who were homeless on the streets in Ottawa. We can do better. We should do better, but we need to create a safety net at the lower level that supports people so that they meet their basic needs. And we need to, as a country, focus on how do we meet the basic needs mm-hmm. of our residents, of our Canadian residents, so that we can then build a stronger economy from that level up. But from the person in Toronto, definitely that's the kind of place where really investing in public transportation, thinking about how to rationalize the use of the private automobile through more ride-sharing approaches, through limiting the access to certain areas so that people have an incentive to use the public transportation. I don't think driving cars was a God-given right in the Bible. The way Doug Ford attacks bicycle lanes, you'd think that was his crusade. I mean, how stupid can you get? Bicycles are so much more efficient. I rode a bike when I was a university student, and I rode it in the winter from Ossington Avenue down to U of T. And, it's a lot less congestion, very little air pollution, and good exercise. I mean, that's the other thing that I get from being a farmer is if I'm out doing farm work every day, it's my exercise program. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't know cities. And what I believe is we've got to work with local communities that know their own context, know what they're trying to do, know what they value, and then let them work together to figure out things. And if the federal government would support them, and then the successful things, the things that have worked really well, share it broadly across the nation, we could make really rapid progress. Because there are creative, inventive people out there who can, who if we say this is the target, this is where we're trying to go. And I contacted people when I was first considering running and asked them for ideas for what would they like for Canada, for the quality of life, for our future vision, and how we could get there. And as I'm a holistic management certified educator, and one of the things we do with people is we talk about creating a holistic goal that helps guide their decision-making process. And I've produced one that I'd be glad to share with you if after we get through your other questions, but I'll be quiet and get to your other questions.
Okay. What do you think is the most pressing foreign issue?
Militarism. And in terms of what I've been concerned about is Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan. I've lived my entire life under the threat of mutually assured destruction. And militarism and the assumption that might will make for a peaceful world, that our ever-increasing armaments makes for a peaceful world is just crazy. And it's been a way of diverting billions and even trillions of dollars for meeting basic human needs, and also been very, very destructive to the environment. I always wondered, what if instead of mutually assured destruction, we'd worked with the theory of mutually assured success and survival, and use those resources to think about, well, how do we meet people's needs across the planet? How do we make sure everybody has water and food? How do we make sure that we're living within the carrying capacity of the environment that we're in? And used our resources for that, wouldn't we be in a much, much better place? And I guess in terms of international, I think watching fascism raise its very ugly head south of our border is a very worrying thing. And what I've been suggesting is that, Canada is not going to militarily defeat the United States. The United States spends more than the next 7 countries, next biggest militarily spending countries, on its military, past, present, and future war preparations, and the damages done by those wars to their veterans. We need a very different strategy. And a fellow named Gene Sharp wrote a series of three books called The Politics of Nonviolent Action. And it's a 3-thing series, but it has a whole range of nonviolent activities, nonviolent tactics that you can use to make an invader regret their effort without encouraging the invader to do nearly the kind of damage that we've witnessed in Ukraine and Gaza. Anyway.
Yeah, sorry. It's just, I know we have limited time, and I still have about 4, 5 more questions. So what is...
Okay, go for it.
Yeah. What do you feel is the most pressing domestic issue?
Well, there's 2 sides to that. The representation one is the one that will never get anywhere on the other policy stuff if we don't have progressive green politicians at the table. And we lost a huge number in the last federal election. They've just decimated the green progressive folks in that area. Housing, food insecurity, they all relate to income. So creating a fair wage system, a living wage system, and then a guaranteed annual income system could help address the root cause of a number of these issues, which is people having inadequate spending power to meet their basic needs. Inadequate shelter in Canada is not a good thing, and not having food security is, we are just, when we think about families, we're undermining the future in terms of kids not getting adequate nutrition. In a country with the resources that we have, this is just tragic and criminal. You've got more questions, but that would be mine.
So what would you do for the groups, like often in election season, there's certain groups of people that feel left behind in the conversation, particularly people living with poverty, people with disabilities. What would you do specifically to help them feel included, involved, and speak to their needs?
Well, as I say, the issue of inadequate purchasing power or income is, I think a root cause of many of the challenges that people with disabilities, people living in poverty face. And by setting some benchmarks, a living wage approach, and then a supplement to say that, a guaranteed annual income would help address make it easier for them to cope with the challenges that they are facing right now. It's certainly not going to solve all the problems, because different people, I stopped and talked to some people on the street in Ottawa, and different people are there for different reasons. So you have to have a support network as well, and mental health is certainly an area where we need more support too. We could either look to become a caring community, and one where we seek to support each other. And the other thing that's really important for us to realize, we've been sold this thing of the rugged individual and how we've got to stand on our own 2 feet. Nobody stands on their own 2 feet when they're born. We all need support and a community of support. And we'll need it in our infancy. We may need it after an accident or something that disables us. We'll certainly need it as we get older. So how do we build that caring community and say that's part of what it is to be part of the human community? Talking about a fair tax system and a guaranteed annual income approach and a living wage approach. And the other thing I would say, particularly to small business people, if you have a living wage structure, it actually means that people in your community have money to spend in your store. And it means that you aren't competing against exploitive multinational corporations that use cheap labor to close down the shops on Main Street. So, ordinary small business people shouldn't fear a fair wage structure, because it actually means that they might get to earn a fair wage from their labor in their business, because they're now competing with big corporations whose main method is to exploit labor and exploit their suppliers too, if you think of Walmart and the way it deals with its suppliers.
Okay. What would you say to the people who were part of the NDP, voted for the NDP, but over the past, I'd say about 10 years, have really lost faith in the NDP?
Well, I mean,
for very valid reasons,
I didn't I got involved in the NDP because I wanted to change the government, and I wanted to change how we treated the environment and how we treated each other. And I did not get involved so that I could get a fundraising email every couple of days and 3 or 4 frantic ones on the last day of the last quarter. My belief is we have to rebuild the party from the ground up. That means working at the riding association level and helping empower our riding associations so they can reach out and be involved in the community. Spaghetti dinners, pub nights, getting involved with people. And we need to figure out, between the federal, the provincial, and the riding association level, how to create a membership structure that makes membership work the best fundraising thing a local riding can do. And when I was first involved, a good poll in our riding was 10%. And it wasn't viewed by the provincial party as the area, an area worth doing a lot of work. But what we did was we organized what we called field mouse drives, where we got together activists from several of the neighboring ridings, and we'd go in and we'd do membership work, because the local riding got a significant part of the membership money. And that was what we then used to help build the local ridings. And that membership work was what helped, in part, get the Ontario NDP government in 1990. That we built better coordination. And I mean, we need to reach out into our communities, because the idea of our local community will be doing a hospital fundraising radiothon. We need to reach into rural communities, because that's places where we know we need to cooperate and work together. Now, if I'm stuck in a snowbank, it doesn't matter what the politics of the person driving by. First person will stop and help me dig out, because we know we need each other. And that's what the progressive green vision is, that we need to work together and we need each other to get through this crisis that we're in.
Would you actually enforce the Healthcare Act and other things that the provinces try to get around, like trying to privatize our healthcare and things of that sort? That is just driving me absolutely nuts.
Absolutely. We have an amazing system. Is it perfect? No. Is it much better than what we see to the south of us? Yes, it is. And we are all so fortunate, and we cannot afford to only miss what we've got once it's gone. And that's what's happening in Ontario right now, and in other places as well. Yes, it should be enforced. It should be enforced very, very firmly. And the kind of sneaky privatization and creeping privatization that's going on is just criminal.
Okay, and last thing, because people with disabilities, generally speaking, don't hear anything about them in these campaigns. And so you have the idea of the universal basic income and stuff, and that would definitely help people with disabilities. But do you have any other words to maybe encourage us to go out and vote for you? Things that you would do to make our lives easier? Because right now the Liberals, they just passed the disability tax benefit, which was really just a slap across the face for a lot of people, because the vast majority of people with disabilities don't even qualify for it.
I know the older I get, the more I know I don't know, Sandy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an area where I would need to work with people who have disabilities, who know the system far better than I do, and figure out, how do we make our society a caring one that recognizes that, people with disabilities are a important part of our community, and how do we, welcome them in? My experience when I was involved in the minister's office was that it's not just about, a lot of politicians talk about fighting for people. I'm not interested in fighting for people. We have enough fighting imagery. I'm interested in working for people, but even more, I'm interested in working with people. But I do not have a lot of experience with disability issues.
I
And
have
so,
a thing or two that I could always say about that. But
sure.
uh,
Well,
yeah.
by all means,
Mhm.
I'd like to hear what you have to say, because I know I've been very, very fortunate
Mhm.
through my life,
Yeah.
and I've spent, um, I've had 2 replacement hips, so I was laid up for 5-6 weeks, but I have very little experience. I have at one time done some work in a wheelchair just to have a sense of how difficult it can be to
Mhm.
get somewhere. But it's not an area that I know much. But tell me,
Yeah.
I'm,
Well,
I'm
we
interested.
like again, we're running a bit low on time, so I would love to have you on for another conversation sometime, but I will quickly say something that just comes to the top of my head right now, because I've talked about it recently on my show. Uh, the reality that I can't move to another province if I want to. Because if I do, I'll have to reapply for disability in that province. And most provinces, most times when you apply for disability, they automatically reject you, no matter what. And then
So
I would have to find a
so
family
it's the
doctor in that area to make me qualified. And the criteria for that province might not be the same here. And the rates across the country are different.
okay. So it's what I'm hearing is the issue of transportability and the issue of consistency
Yeah.
across the
Or like
country
if
are
for some
huge issues.
reason I want
Huge
to
issues.
move to Nova Scotia or Quebec or I do have family in Alberta, but it'd be a stretch for me to want to move there. But BC is really nice, or even the territories.
Yeah.
There's lots of beautiful places in this country. Or if there's people, let's say in Alberta, who are queer and trans and are terrified about what Danielle Smith is doing to them, but they also
Yeah.
live with disabilities, how can they flee to another province if that
The
doesn't carry
trap.
over?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
sometimes
Mm.
a necessity to move, but sometimes you have maybe an opportunity for a different type of job, a relationship, family. Um, like there's lots of different reasons why somebody would want to move. And so for me, that's one thing that's off the top of my head, that we don't have that same freedom as a lot of other Canadians to just be able to live in areas that we choose.
Right. Well, that's very helpful, and it certainly is something that um, a federal government could work to try and harmonize and work on.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so how can people help out with your campaign? Get both for people, just the average person, but also people who don't have any money to spend. How can they help out?
We're looking for volunteers to phone through the membership list, and they can contact our campaign. The email is Tony McQuail Green Progressive, all one word, at gmail.com. And the website is tonymcquailgreenprogressive.ca.
I'll have those all
And
linked,
um,
available for people in the
yeah,
description box.
okay. And if they go to the website, There's a place where if they are a New Democrat, they can just go and sign the nomination papers. If they're not a New Democrat, if you're not gainfully employed, unwaged, whatever, and I would say if you're having to work 2 jobs, you're not gainfully employed. You're subsistently employed. The membership fee varies from province, but in Ontario, I know it's $5. Some places it may be less, but that's a very low membership fee. If you're got a job, it's $25 to be a member. So you have to be a member to sign the nomination form. If you go to the support tab at the top of the main page, you'll get to a form where you can put in your contact information and volunteer. And so if you don't have money, but you have time and you'd like to support the campaign, contact us, and we're still building from the ground up. We're trying to get a phoning system in place and an emailing system in place. So say I had none of that when I started, so it's a bit of an adventure, but we're trying to build, and we're trying to meet that first $33,000 hurdle. We're over halfway there now, but it's a big hurdle, as you can imagine.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, this has been absolutely wonderful. I would love to have you back on my channel sometimes, maybe just even to talk about the environment and stuff. I know that's it's not a sexy topic, but it's a very important topic, and we can do that sometime. And also, if you could let the other candidates know I'm not that scary. I've reached out to all of them to have a conversation, so I would love to be able to have a conversation with all of them. So maybe next time you're talking to them, be like, yeah, they're all right. They're all right.
I'll do that next time I see them. But one of the things, we're running a very, very frugal campaign. So I am not traveling all over the country. I did get to the CLC, the Canadian Labour Congress Forum. I hope to get to the Montreal meeting at the end of November if I'm still in the running and we've raised the money. And I hope to get to BC and also then the convention. But for environmental reasons as well as economic reasons, we're trying to run a campaign that's redesigned to not use as much resources, and we think that makes sense, and maybe it'll be well supported. We'll see.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on, and I will say to my audience,
Well, thank you.
Salut, à la prochaine. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.